Every tank of oil ever pumped from the ground, every barrel that ever fueled a war, built an empire, or broke a nation, all of it combined, is worth less than the semiconductor industry will produce in the next 8 years. Think about what that means. Oil took a century to reshape the global order. Microchips did it in a decade, and most people still don't understand what they actually are. Not the chips in your phone, not the chips in your laptop, the chips that decide which country gets to build aircraft carriers, which economy survives, which government falls. This isn't a technology story. It is a power story, and it is the most important one happening on Earth right now. Most people understand a world like this. Oil-rich nations are powerful. Tech companies make gadgets, and semiconductors are something engineers worry about in Silicon Valley. That world doesn't exist anymore. What actually exists is this. A single company in the Netherlands, a company most people have never heard of, holds a monopoly over a machine that every advanced economy on Earth depends on to function. Without it, you cannot build a modern fighter jet, a 5G network, an AI data center, or a competitive financial system. One company, one machine, no substitutes. The specific mechanism is this. The complexity of modern chip manufacturing has become so extreme that the entire global supply chain for cutting-edge semiconductors has collapsed into a handful of choke points, and those choke points are controlled not by governments, but by corporations answerable to their shareholders and to one geography, the United States. Here is what that means for the next 20 years of history, and for your country, your economy, and your future. To understand where we are, you have to go back to 1987. Taiwan. A man named Morris Chang, a veteran of Texas Instruments, pitches the Taiwanese government on a radical idea. Don't build chips, just manufacture them. Every other company in the world at that point designed and manufactured its own chips. Chang's insight was to separate those two functions entirely. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, would make chips for anyone who needed them. The designers could be anywhere. The manufacturing would be in Taiwan. The motivation was pure industrial economics. The opposing force was obvious. Why would any serious company outsource its most critical production to a contract manufacturer halfway around the world? The answer came slowly, then all at once. By 2024, TSMC controlled 92% of the world's most advanced chip production. The entire smartphone industry runs on their fabs. Apple's iPhone, NVIDIA's AI accelerators, the processors that run Amazon's cloud, Google's search, and the U.S. military's most sensitive weapon systems. All made in Taiwan. All made in a factory complex the size of a small city on an island of 23 million people, 180 kilometers from the Chinese mainland. That is not a supply chain. That is a single point of catastrophic failure, and the entire global economy has built itself around it. Here is a number that should stop you cold. The United States, the country that invented the microchip, that pioneered semiconductor design, that built Intel and AMD and Qualcomm, currently manufactures less than 10% of global chip output and 0% of the world's most advanced chips. 0. The most powerful military on Earth cannot produce, domestically, the components its own weapon systems require. Everyone who follows technology news knows there was a chip shortage. 2021, car factories shut down. PlayStation consoles disappeared from shelves. Wait times for semiconductors stretched to 52 weeks. The conventional narrative. COVID disrupted supply chains. Demand spiked. Things normalized. That is not what happened. The shortage was a symptom. The disease is structural. Modern chip manufacturing, specifically the production of chips at 5-nanometer scale and below, requires a machine called an extreme ultraviolet lithography system, EUV. There is one company in the world that makes it, ASML, headquartered in Veldhoven, the Netherlands. Each machine costs $200 million, takes 13 months to build, requires 100,000 individual components sourced from 5,000 suppliers across 16 countries, and ASML manufactures approximately 50 of them per year. 50 machines for the entire world. Those 50 machines, operating in TSMC's fabs in Taiwan and a handful of other locations, produce virtually every advanced chip used on Earth. This is not a bottleneck. It is a needle's eye, and the entire global technology economy is trying to pass through it. This concentration has turned semiconductors into the primary instrument of geopolitical leverage. In October 2022, the Biden administration did something that had never been done before in the history of U.S. export policy. It banned the sale of advanced chips and equipment to make them to China, not to one Chinese company, not to one application, to an entire nation. The explicit goal was to freeze China's AI and military technology development in place. The result? China's top chip manufacturer, SMIC, remained stuck at 7-nanometer production. NVIDIA's best AI chips, the ones powering ChatGPT, the ones training the next generation of large language models, are legally barred from Chinese territory. The United States has effectively imposed a technological blockade, and the blockade works because the choke points exist. This is not trade policy. This is a new kind of warfare. You might think this is a story about China and America. It is not. It is a story about every country that has not secured its place in the semiconductor supply chain. In 2023, global semiconductor revenue was $527 billion. By 2030, analysts project it will reach $1 trillion. Every electric vehicle requires between 1,000 and 3,000 chips. Every wind turbine, every hospital scanner, every defense system, every AI model, every autonomous vehicle. If your country cannot access or produce semiconductors, it cannot build a modern economy. It cannot defend itself with modern weapons. It cannot compete in AI. It becomes, in the language of geopolitics, a client state, dependent on the goodwill of whoever controls the fabs. The new oil doesn't run out. It just gets weaponized. Here is what you think this story is about. China versus America. A new Cold War being fought with chips instead of missiles. Here is what it's actually about. Taiwan. Everything we have discussed, the $527 billion industry, the ASML monopoly, the export controls, the military anxieties, all of it orbits one 36,000 square kilometer island that the world's two superpowers both claim authority over and that neither can afford to let fall into the wrong hands. TSMC's founder, Morris Chang, has described his own company as a silicon shield. The idea that Taiwan's indispensability to global chip supply makes it too valuable to invade. Destroy the fabs, and you destroy the global technology economy. No rational actor would risk it. But here is the twist within the twist. TSMC knows the shield is shrinking. Under U.S. pressure, TSMC is now building fabs in Arizona, in Japan, in Germany. The United States is spending $52 billion through the CHIPS Act to rebuild domestic semiconductor manufacturing. The European Union has pledged $47 billion. Japan, South Korea, and India have announced their own subsidy packages. Everyone is racing to replicate what Taiwan built. And as they succeed, slowly, expensively, imperfectly, Taiwan's strategic value diminishes. The silicon shield is being deliberately dismantled by the country it was supposed to protect. The real story was never about who controls the chips. It was always about who controls Taiwan, and whether making chips everywhere else makes that question less dangerous or more. We open with a number. The semiconductor industry will generate more economic value in the next 8 years than all the oil ever extracted from the ground. Here is what that number actually means. Oil required geography. You either had it under your soil or you didn't. Semiconductors require knowledge, capital, infrastructure, and above all, access to a global supply chain that currently runs through Taiwan, the Netherlands, and a handful of laboratories in the United States and South Korea. Every nation on Earth that is not inside that supply chain is making a strategic calculation about how long it can afford to stay outside it. Whoever controls the choke points of chip manufacturing controls the ceiling of every other nation's ambitions. And that control is now the central fact of 21st century power. Not military strength, not energy reserves, not even financial capital. Chips. The United States understood this in 2022 and moved decisively. China understood it a decade earlier and is spending $150 billion trying to escape the trap. Europe is waking up to it too late. Most of the rest of the world hasn't yet asked the question. But here is what no one has fully answered. What happens when the silicon shield is gone? TSMC has been replicated in 6 countries, and Taiwan is no longer the world's most strategically indispensable island? Does that make conflict less likely? Or does it remove the last reason to hold back? We don't know yet, but the next 10 years will tell us.